I'm Jean-Paul Anthony, my real name, but for purposes of our display, I am Jarne Larsen. What I'm here today is actually as a bowyer, a person who makes longbows. What I have in my hands is one of the best woods in the world to make a bow from. This is yew wood, and what you see here is the wood has two different colours. You have a whiter wood at the top and a darker wood in the bottom. This is actually what we call a natural lamination. The two types of wood are bonded together and it grows together as part of the tree. So this is the sapwood and this is the heartwood. The sapwood's on the outside of the tree, that's where all the nutrients come from. But the property of this sapwood is that it's like a rubber band. It will stretch but then snap back. The heartwood is the centre of the core of the tree, and this thing is like a spring. It can be compressed, but it will want to spring back out. So when I make the bow, I make the sapwood what we call the back of the bow. This is the bit that faces away from the archer. The heartwood is the belly of the bow. So what I now do is have the rubber band being stretched when I pull it back, and it wants to swing forward. When I do the same action here, the heartwood is being compressed, but it wants to swing forward, so it's always going to fight me, and that's where the power of the bow comes in. What I'm working on here is another bow, same design, different wood. This is made of ash. Ash is another wood that can be used to make the longbow. And this is actually a simpler, much simpler bow. You can see the difference between them. This ash piece has been made from a squared piece of timber. This yew wood takes a lot more of the natural form of the tree itself. So I'm going to have to work with the whole tree. But the basic designs are much the same. I have a piece of wood that I have to shape. So I've got its handle area, a top limb, and a bottom limb. And all I do is remove wood to get to the draw weight and draw length that I want. So from here, I start from a square piece of timber, I taper the top limbs and the sides and in the belly. I leave the back alone. And to bring the shapes in, I use different tools. Here I'm using a spoke shave to remove relatively small amounts of wood, but it allows me to get to a general shape that I want, and get from there, I do a stage called tillering. Tillering is where we teach a bow how to bend. So this point here is called floor tillering, because I'm using the floor, put my hand in the middle, hand on the top, and I push down, and I look at how the bow is bending. And you can see here, there is no bend here, but there is some bending here. So that means I need to take wood from this section to make the bow bend evenly. And when I turn it upside down and look at the other limb, for the same amount of pressure, there's a slight, I need to remove some more wood here. It's slightly more even along that bottom part, but I still need to take a lot of wood because the pressure I'm putting on there is a bit much. I need it to be a little less, because this is going to be a lightweight bow. But once I've done all that, the bow is almost there, but I need to do further things to it. I need to be able to get to the draw weight and draw length that I need. And there are tools for that. It's called tillering tree. There. It's a stick with some notches in it. The bow goes in here, and the string can be put into these notches. This notch here is 28 inches. So that's 30 inches and 32 inches. When I make a bow, it has to make at least here, and preferably I make it to the 30-inch mark. That's a safety margin. And how we do that is if I take this bow, which is finished, I normally would start with a string that is very loose. So the string would be loose but in the nocks, and I would initially put it onto the tillering tree and get it to the draw weight and draw length that I want, and making sure all the limbs are even. But when the bow is finished, the bow is fully braced, where I can put my fist and my thumb in there. This is known as a fist merle. And when you put it onto the tillering tree, excuse me, I'm drawing the bow back and checking how strong the bow is and putting it into the notches so I know where it is and how strong it should be. Now I know with this bow it will get to here because this is a finished bow, but it's a coldish day and I've not warmed up the bow, so I'm going to leave it in this point here. And what I want you to see is how the bow looks. So if we go out to the front and I rest the bow against the table, you will see how the bow actually bends. When I'm tillering a bow, what you want to have is this limb to bend exactly the same as that. And so when you get to the final draw length and the draw weight, that bow is ready for use. But of course, you need something to shoot from it. Now in the Viking period, there was multiple types of arrows. The bow itself was used for hunting and also for war. So hunting arrows would come in two major styles. These leaf blade designs. They're designed to take down animals, exsanguinate them. In other words, bleed them out as quickly as possible. But the thing is, what you can kill with an animal, you can kill humans with. And in the Viking period, even in where we are today in the 11th century, 1066, still many people in the battlefield would not have armour. So these are very effective against combatants who don't have armour. But we also have a wee trick up our sleeves. We have armour-piercing arrows. So armour piercing is that the armour of the day is mail. These are riveted rings of metal, taking about 20 to 30,000 rivets, 20 to 30,000 rings, all riveted together to make a hauberk or a hauberk. This suit of mail gives great protection against slashing cuts, but it doesn't stop these arrowheads. It will stop the leaf blade design. And so an archer will have in their quiver some of these arrows and some of these arrows. The design of this type of head, a bodkin head or a needle point, is that it will break through the links of the armour to penetrate into the body. But these are nice and lightweight arrows. You can see how small they are. They're approximately 9mm for an arrow shaft. If we skip on a couple hundred years, this is the same purpose arrow for breaking armour of mail, but it's designed for bows over 120 pounds draw weight. These are designed for bows of about 70, 80, maybe even 90 pounds draw weight. And you can see the difference between the two armour-piercing type arrowheads. How big it is, how heavy it is, and the arrow shaft that's required to be able to take the power of the bow through the arrow shaft to make impact on the enemy. Arrows come in two different styles. You have, in my hands here, a basic arrow that we will use on the reenactment field. Why? Because we have a rubber band at the end. The whole point of this is that we will go home and not to accident emergency at the end of the day. However, This style of arrow was actually in use throughout history. It's a hunting arrow. Instead of a rubber blunt, what they would actually create is either carving a whole arrow shaft from a larger piece of wood and incorporating one end as a solid piece of wood to create the arrow shaft, the head, and getting to the end where the nock is. Alternatively, they would actually have a piece of horn drilled out and shaped like this to fit over the end of the arrow shaft. The fletchings. This allows to stabilise the arrow in flight. And we know that they actually did bind down the arrow fletchings. Why? Because they would actually have a type of glue, pitch pine tar. That's why you have this black here. And you would actually usually have that pitch pine tar along parts where the fletchings are going to be. When they bind it down, you're actually going to get the tar being absorbed by the linen thread, so that when you actually find the arrows, for example, a site called Hedeby or Hedeby, which is in southern Denmark and near the borders of northern Germany, you've actually got arrows where the fletchings have rotted away, but you still have the black pitch pine tar and little voids where some of the tar has been removed by the linen threads, and you can actually see the marks where the linen thread used to be. You can then also see how many fletches they had on the arrow, also the length of the fletches of the arrow. Now these ones, as I say, are made specifically for our reenactments. Normally they would be a lot longer, approximately 5 to 6 inches. They would have two types of fletching styles. This style for hunting, for small game like birds, small mammals like hares. You would also have 3 flights. Those 3 flights are much faster. They would be coupled with a much sharper arrow point, just as I've showed you before. For example, this leaf blade design instead, or the bodkin point instead. These heads would be socketed like this, or tanged, where you would actually insert it into the end of the arrow and bind it on together. The socketed heads started to come into far greater use in the 11th century into the 12th century. We even know one bird that they actually used for creating the flights, because some of the fletchings on an arrow were actually found intact, and they were able to get DNA analysis done on that small remains, and it came from the tail of the white-tailed sea eagle. Having said that, most of the flights you'll find, as long as it's from a large bird, the primary wing feathers. So we're talking about swans, geese, birds like that, and yes, eagle feathers as well, as long as it's primary wing feathers, and that's what will be used in here. We don't trim these flights to make it so the arrow will actually fly slow. Normally, when you want to use an arrow properly, you'll have, for this style of arrow, it tends to be 5 to 6 inches in length. The flights are actually trimmed, so we'd actually take scissors to these and actually make a simple cut, tapering from the front to the back. The length at the end is round about maybe 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch at the back. Here, you're talking about 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 in length, and that gives a nice amount of drag, slows down the arrow. And we're using bows that are much lighter in draw weight than would actually be in use in the period. So in the reenactment field, we are limited to 35 pounds draw weight. In history, in the Viking period, through into the Norman conquests, we're talking bows between 70 to 100 pounds draw weight. It will be much later, approximately 200 years, before bows of 120, 130, 150 pounds draw weight are in normal use in the English fields. So you can see the difference already just in the size of the arrow shaft itself. the weight of the head. All of this is because the armour is improving, and therefore it's an arms race. In order to get the same amount of penetration into the improved armour, you need heavier weight bows and more training to get to that standard. The tools of the trade for a bowyer and even for an arrow maker are all much the same. A lot of the tools you will recognise in the 21st century. The draw knife is designed to remove quite a lot of wood relatively easily. It's really sharp, and as the name suggests, you draw the knife towards yourself. And no, you can't actually cut yourself with it because of how you use it. And in fact, there's a gentleman further along who is a professional bow maker as his day job in the 21st century, and you'll actually can see him making some of his bows that he will actually use for his stock and sell later on. But we start off when we're taking a lot of wood, the draw knife. From there, we use the spoke shave. Now this one is from the 21st century. This one is a style from the 10th century. There isn't actually much of a difference between them. They're a piece of wood with a metal blade and a small channel to allow you to actually draw the shavings through. Another tool that I use, and this is a tool that you'll see from the Roman period, through the Viking period, through into the high medieval period, and even into the 21st century. And that is the plane. In this case, it's a box plane. Why? Because it looks like a box. And all you do is have a metal blade that kind of looks like a chisel. You slide that in. Now in the 21st century, what they will do is actually have this made of metal and a turn screw to hold it in place. Well, we don't do that here. You have a wooden wedge. You slide that wedge in to fix the blade in position, allowing you to use the plane across the wood. If you skip on a few more centuries and go into the 16th century, the year 1542, Henry VIII's battleship, flagship, the Mary Rose, sank. And with it sank hundreds of bows, arrows, the tools for use in warfare on board ship, and also the tools to make bows, as well as make replacements to parts on the ship. And you will find tools like this on board, from this size to pieces of box planes which are about 3 foot long, and where you don't actually move the plane against the wood, you move the wood against the plane. Also in use is a simple tool called the rasp. This is a piece of iron, and where a blacksmith will put it into a small vise, and with a steel point hammer in indentations, lifting up the iron. What does that do? Well, in points of the wood where the grain is lifting, like here, I can smooth that down and just use that. I also use it when I excuse me, when I have on the U piece of wood here these little black marks. These are knots. Well, I don't want to break through those knots, so when I'm carving out the bow, sometimes instead of using the spoke shave or the plane to create the shape of the bow, I'll end up having to use the rasp instead to go around the knot. So the knot will be raised but smooth. If I was to cut through the knot, you'll actually have a small hole left in the wood, but when it stretches and strains, that weakens the bow and could end up with a break. So by using simple tools like this, we can actually get to a basic shape. And finally, we get to the last two tools of use. A piece of metal. It has been sharpened, but instead of a knife blade sharp, where you have it a small 15-degree angle. This is more likely about 45-degree angle. The reason being, you'll have some edges on the back edge. And what does that do? Well, you see these tool marks? Here it's pretty rough. I scrape the wood away, helping to reduce the tool marks. In the 20th century, 19th century, etc., cabinet makers will be using these things. It's called a cabinet scraper for a reason. It got rid of all the tool marks for the fine furniture of the day. So by doing that, I reduced some of these tool marks to a point where I will actually sand it down. Now I won't use a linen rag with some sand and wipe it down that way. It's too complicated. You don't get a great work with that. What I do have here is my own version of multigrade sandpaper. This is a skin from the ray. It's a member of the shark's family. And this skin is very rough. Rough because it's actually got teeth on its outside as well as on the inside. So what we'll have here are what known as denticles. These rough shapes, these rough teeth as it were, are coming from sort of a large size up here to a very small size down here. So you actually have a multi-grading. So you have coarse down to fine. And all I need to do is that, to really smooth down and finish off a bow, to get rid of any tool marks and to create a nice, clean, smooth finish to the bow, where I can then wax it using a mixture of beeswax and linseed oil. That acts as a waterproofing, allowing the bow to be used and retained for many years to come. This particular bow that I've made is probably a good 8 years old and it's still in fine use. It was not the easiest of bows to make. The wood twists. It was very hard to tiller, to actually shoot straight and bend properly. It actually took me a month of tillering. But despite the strange shape, it actually shoots very well. The string itself will be made of linen threads, basically twisted together in the way that you would actually make rope or cordage, creating a single loop at the top that's laid in. Forgive the little marker, this is so we get for safety when we're in the field. So the cordage finishes here, we twist in here, and we get to the end. We start to make cordage, and I have what's known as a special loop at the end called the bowyer's knot, also known as a timber half hitch. It's a flexible knot where it uses tension to hold it closed. I can readjust the length of the string just by opening up the knot, reducing the length of the string or increasing the length of string, retying the knot, putting it back in, so that I can always make sure the bow is fully braced and at the right height for my